Hey everybody, Hunter back again from Showtime Studios. Part number 3 of the build series that we're doing. This one here is going to be on assembling the engine, which is the first step in the instructions. Now, the instructions on camera are probably going to be upside down because I've got them here where I can see it, but if I turn them over this way, you guys can see it. So we're not really paying attention to the instructions. I don't think we're going to be paying attention to what we'll be gluing together and things like that. One thing I would like to make mention of, especially for all the beginners out there and the guys not familiar with a glue together kit, a lot of times you'll have real nice drawings. You can come in here and look at certain parts, and then you can come over to your parts tree and you can find that part on the parts tree. Also, you will have, like on this one, it'll say the engine block. The left side of the engine block is number 1. The right side of the engine block is number 3. If you come onto your parts tree, most kits will have a number right here on the sprue that'll say 1 and 3. So that is those two pieces right there. And then you have your intake valley with the starter on it, which is number 2. And you just look around your sheet, you find number 2, which is right here, and that'll be that part. Now, also, before we get started on it, you'll see little letters on here. And on the AMT, like on the engine, I see a whole lot of F as far as the letter in the little square box. Now, what that is that is a paint call out. The letter F, if you go back here to your paint call out and you scan through it, it's saying that it's letter F is silver. And if you've got something that's E, it'll be flat white. C is semi-gloss black. And then it goes all the way. It goes from A to A to Z, to believe it or not, which is gray, dark green, light green, transparent blue, dark blue. There's a lot of different colors. But I doubt very seriously if every one of these colors are used on this kit. So the F translates to a silver. So what you kind of want to do with this, if you're starting out and you're not real familiar, is look around at your assembly on your first step. And like in the case of this, the engine block halves are F, which means they're silver. The intake valley is silver. The heads are silver. The front timing cover is silver, and the oil pan is silver. Now, what I gather from that is you could clean up and glue all of those parts together, and then you can paint them as one assembly instead of painting them individual. If you want to do that, you can. A lot of guys that are starting out will go in and paint the parts on the parts tree. That is a way that you can do it. I don't like doing that myself because once you paint this part on the parts tree and then you clip it off, you've got to touch up the paint. Some things, it's not that big a deal. Other things, it's kind of hard to go in, especially if you spray this, and then to touch it up, you've got to go in with a brush. So do you have the exact same paint, same consistency? Can you see where you touched it up? So I'm going to show you my procedure on how I go about doing, gluing this stuff together, and then we'll paint it. So we're going to jump right into this. We're going to go ahead and get out our snippers. And the one thing that I need to do is put a new blade in this hobby knife. I'll be right back. Okay, we got a new blade for the hobby knife. We're going to pop that in there. And we're going to need some glue, of course. So we're going to get some of the Tamiya Extra Thin out here. And like I say, if you go back to the intro to it, or the first part of it, we were showing the different adhesives and stuff like that. You don't have to use this Tamiya Extra Thin. You can use the 8872. You can even use tube glue if you need to. But we're going to be using the Tamiya Extra Thin on this. So what we're going to do is, since the foundation of the engine is the basis for the engine, I guess you could say, we're going to go ahead and cut off the engine block pieces. So that is part numbers 1 and 3 in this particular kit. And you just want to come in pretty close to your part and snip that off with the snippers. You can leave a little bit of the sprue attachment point on there. And then I will come in with the hobby knife and just very lightly go over where that sprue attachment point is. And then I normally grab a sanding stick. In this case, it's one of the medium sanding sticks. And I'll just clean up that part a little bit, just to make sure we got it pretty decent. Okay, now we're going to do what they call dry fitting. And dry fitting is where you take your two parts, your two halves, and you set them together, just setting together with no glue. And you're going to look at, how much of a seam you got. If the parts actually line up, sometimes you'll have what they call a step. And that's where one half of your part will be higher than the other half when it lines up on the pins or whatever you have. In this case here, we don't have pins. This is actually a notch that it lines up in. So this is all looking pretty good. What we're going to do is go ahead and we're going to put some Tamiya extra thin on this and glue the engine halves together. And with any glues, you don't need a whole lot. And as you notice, I'm gluing on the inside. I tend to do that whenever I can. I like to keep the glue from being on the outside visible part of the parts. Now, the one thing about the Tamiya extra thin is it has capillary action, where if you just touch it to the joint, it'll flow all the way across that joint. So there we have the engine block glued together. Next up, we're going to move on to, let's go ahead and put the oil pan on it, since it's painted silver also. So we're going to go in and cut that off the parts tree. And like I say, for you guys out there, hopefully you don't get bored, but I don't like the fast forward videos. I like to do everything in real time. So, these videos may be a little longer. I'm going to try to be as efficient as I can on cleaning up the parts and getting stuff glued together for each step. Same procedure. I just took the hobby knife, cut off where it was attached to the sprue there a little bit, and now I'm just taking the sanding stick, squaring it up. Everything looks good. Make sure that you look at your instructions and get your orientation right on your engine or whatever part you're gluing together. You can see here, when you put these two parts together, the front half of the engine has a square in it, a square cutout. So that's the front of the engine. So then the oil pan, the sump, is toward the rear. And a lot of times your locating pins will, put it in that exact position for you. Sometimes they won't. So we're going to go ahead and dry fit the oil pan and see what it looks like. And I see a little bit of a gap on the oil pan rail. So what I like to do in that case is I will take the sanding stick and lay the part flat on the sanding stick. And I will just lightly sand that. And what that'll do is put a nice flat surface and get rid of any molding flaws and up and down that's in this rail. And then when you set the assembly together, it'll fit nice and flush. And that actually looks real good. Yep, that looks good there. Now, real quick, I'm going to show you another little trick for you guys that are using a different type of adhesive. Now, of course, on that oil pan, I would have to touch the rail to make the adhesive flow all the way around. Another thing that you can do, this is the thicker Tamiya cement. And this stays in place a little bit more than the extra thin. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip the block over here. And we're going to take this little bit thicker Tamiya cement. And we're just going to brush across to where that oil pan sets on. And that's another good thing about pre-fitting your parts and doing a test fit on them, is you have an idea of exactly how that part's going to look when it goes into place. So now we brushed a little bit of that on. We're going to take the oil pan. We're going to carefully set it down into place. And make sure everything's squared up and even. And there we go. And that way you're not touching the Tamiya extra thin to the outside here and, taking a chance of getting glue running down in all this detail and all that kind of stuff. This thicker glue works pretty good for that. And you can also do that with the 8872, the tester's glue. So, okay, now we got the oil pan on. Next, we're going to move on to the heads. So, same procedure. This is, you'll repeat this a lot. Cutting parts off the tree is pretty much the same no matter what you're doing. For the most part, there is some do's and don'ts in it, but pretty much it's the same procedure every time. And I'm going to go ahead and cut the lifter valley off of there also. And I'm going to cut the front cover off. Now, what I did there is something that as you get more experienced, you're able to do. I don't really recommend, if you're gluing like the two engine halves together, go ahead and cut just those off, clean them up, pre-fit them, glue them together, and then move on to like the oil pan. And that's the only thing you want to cut off the parts tree. You don't want to cut all these parts off the parts tree and have them laying here, because if you're newer to it, you may not, it's going to make it harder for you to understand where they go. If you're a gearhead like me and been around cars all your life, you can pretty much cut all these parts off, put them in a bag, shake them up. And, you know, us guys that have been into it for a long time and know one-to-one cars, we know exactly where the stuff's supposed to go. So now we're going to move on to doing a little bit of fitting on the heads. And as soon as I get everything turned around here the right way. And this is another thing that you want to check your orientation on your parts, and make sure that you are putting them on the right side, because a lot of times a part will go on this side, but it'll also go on this side over here. So you just want to make sure that you have your parts going the right direction, so you don't have any issues with anything. So we've got that all turned around now. I'm checking the fit of that. We have a little bit of play in that. I'm going to go ahead and sand that down just like we did before. It's a little bit of up and down on the head there. And you're not taking a lot of material off when you do this. You're just taking very slight amount off of it. And we're going to go ahead and clean this one up too, since it's probably going to have the same issue. Like I say, this is just called dry fitting. I mean, this is something that I highly recommend to anybody that's building out there, is to do these steps. Okay. That actually looks pretty good now, for the most part. Now, there is a mold line that runs around this part, and it goes all the way around and around this side. What you want to do with that mold line is that's something that you really need to get rid of. So we're going to come in, we're going to clean that up. I usually start out on mold lines with the hobby knife. You can also take the hobby knife and just use it as a scraper with the number 11 blade. It works very well for that. And scrape that off as much as you can. And now I'll go in with the sanding stick, and we're going to make all that flat. And you just want to sand a little bit, keep a check on it. See what it looks like. And once you've got it where it's flat, you're good to go with that part. Move on to the other side. Or glue the part in place, whichever step you're on. So we're just going to clean that up. It looks pretty good. Now we do have a mold line that comes down the side of the head right here. We're going to go ahead and clean that up and get rid of that. And when I talk about these mold lines and stuff, that's all basics. All model parts are going to have some sort of a mold line in them somewhere, unless they are what they call slide technology. But the majority of the kits that we mess with, slide technology is mostly armor and some aircraft stuff. Not a whole lot of it out there in the automotive side, but AMT and Revell and, you know, Mobius and companies like that, they're not using slide technology that I know of. I haven't seen a kit from them yet that's got slide technology in it. But there, we have that head cleaned up. now we'll go ahead and check our fit here again. I just got to make sure I get everything lined up the way it should be and make sure I got the right part in the right spot. That's the main thing. The right part in the right spot. Okay, let me see here. I got a little bit of a cleanup to do here on top of the block. Not quite fitting the way I want it to, but we'll fix that. There we go. Okay, let's see. This head here is this side. All right, we've got that one all cleaned up, all the mold lines out of it. Now we're going to go back to the thicker Tamiya glue, and we're going to put some across the surface here where the head sits down into place, just like that. And hopefully I pick up the right head. Yeah, there it is. That's the one I'm looking for. And then we're just going to glue that on. We're going to square everything up, make sure it looks good, and make sure it's, even front to back. And that's what you're doing during dry fitting. You're kind of checking things like that just to make sure. Now, there is a couple more mold lines that run up the intake runners, and that's something as all this dries up before we paint it, I will take care of that. You can take care of that beforehand if you want to. A little bit of flash on this part of the head. Not real bad, but a little bit. So we're going to clean that up. And as you get into modeling and, each kit, it's pretty much a lot of the steps and stuff that you're doing in it are going to be repetitive. I mean, you're going to do pretty much the same procedures on any kit out there. There's going to be different parts and stuff that you're doing, but as far as the basic procedures, they are very similar, and it doesn't matter if you're doing a car kit, an armor kit, an aircraft kit, a ship, whatever. It's going to be very close to being the same as far as all this prep and cleanup and parts fitting and, dry fitting and things like that. So this is probably the part where I need to fast forward through it because it said it's boring. It's just, I'm sure that some of you guys out there watching the video are like, come on, get done with this. But this is why my models take a little bit longer also, is because I like to make sure everything fits as good as I can make it fit, especially on a box stock model, because the basics and your assembly procedures is what makes that model either a good model or a bad model. So now that we've got everything cleaned up, we're going ahead and putting some glue on the second head. And we're going to glue that into place. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to check it front to back, make sure everything's lined up and looks good. That looks pretty decent there. Okay. Now that we have that done, I'm going to go ahead and square up the front of the block here where the timing cover goes on with the sanding stick, just to make sure we got all the ups and downs out of it and the timing cover sits nice and flat against the heads and the front of the block. And we'll get the timing cover itself cleaned up. A couple little attachment points on it. And there is a mold line on a few of the parts. Like I say, if you see that little line sticking out on your parts, that is more than likely a mold line. And as you get more experience, you'll be able to spot them a lot quicker. But a lot of mold lines and stuff you can just get rid of by sliding a knife across it, using it for a scraper. Anything that's cast or molded as a round part is most likely going to have a mold line in it. So be prepared for that. A lot of these kits require a lot of cleanup to make the parts look good. This here has a little bit of flash on the front of the timing cover that needs to come off. So we'll just zip that out of there. And I'll do some final cleanup once we get everything glued together and it sets. and the glue's all, firm and everything, we'll go ahead and clean up the parts a little bit more. So we're just getting an initial cleanup on them right now. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and glue the timing cover in. Put a little bit of glue all the way around. And then we're going to line up the front of the timing cover even with the heads on both sides. And just put a little bit of pressure on it. Now this one here, I'm going to go in with a little bit of the Tamiya Extra Thin and let the glue flow down behind everything to make sure that this timing cover stays into place where I'm holding it. Okay, we have the timing cover glued on. Now we're going to go ahead and clean up the lifter valley here, the tray with the starter on it. Same procedure as we done before. Clean up the attachment points. Check your orientation. The starter is going to go toward the rear. So we're going to slip that into place. And we'll slide that all the way back. You know what? I actually, and this is one of the things about doing something live on camera, I made a mistake. I made a mistake. I did not notice that. And that's something that'll happen. I have to separate this block a little bit because the lifter valley actually goes under the block. We'll get it right here in a minute. But hey, nobody's perfect. There we go. Now we got that thing glued in there the way we want it. Well, not glued in yet, but it's going to be. I just had to make a little minor modification there. No big deal. Usually a lifter valley is going to sit, or the tray is going to sit on top. And in this particular kit, they actually made it go in between the block, instead of sitting on top like most normal lifter valley trays. Okay, there we go. Now we got that glued together. That's looking a little bit better. All right, next up, we need to go on to, I think as far as the parts being painted with F, that's all we needed on that. So next we're going to move on to the transmission halves. We're going to go ahead and clip them off the parts tree. We're going to get those glued together. And since they're painted with silver also, we'll go ahead and get those glued on the back of the motor or the engine. And that way, when we get ready to spray that with the silver, we can do it all at one time. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-fit the parts here to see what we got. Looking pretty good. And as you can see, it's the same procedure again. We do the dry fitting, we do the little cleanup, and then we do the dry fitting, and then we glue the parts together. Same thing, time after time. And the more parts you have, the more you do of that. But it's still the same procedure. The transmission will require a little bit of cleanup. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and get the halves lined up here real well, or as good as I can. We're going to sand the front of the transmission just to make sure that we're square when we set it against the back of the block. I'm not setting the transmission against the back of the block. What am I talking about? I got to put that thing called a bell housing in here first. If you didn't have a clutch, this thing wouldn't go very far. So let me snip that part off of here. There we go. Oh, a lot of you guys out there that watch my channel are going to go, man, he makes a lot of mistakes. Hey, it's all good. It's all about having fun, building models, and trying to have the end product come out and look nice. And if anybody says they don't make a mistake, they're probably lying to you, because I make a whole bunch of them. But the one good thing about making mistakes is experience doesn't stop your mistakes. It will stop some of your mistakes, but you're always going to have those little things that you miss, or you're having a bad day or whatever, your brain's just not with it. You're going to have that. So be prepared. Okay, we're going to put a little bit of glue on the back of the block here. And we're going to put that thing on called a bell housing that I forgot all about, because I was going to try to glue the transmission directly to the engine block, and I don't think that's going to work very well. So we're going to glue the bell housing on. And the thing about the bell housing is you want to make sure that you get it so that it's in line with the engine when you hang the transmission on there. Make sure all that stuff lines up and looks, right. And I'm wondering, yep, I made another mistake. Imagine that. I put or did I? No, I didn't make a mistake. Not me. I actually had it right to begin with. I'm just not thinking. There we go. Now, if you sight the back of the transmission with the engine block, you just kind of want to rotate that bell housing while the glue is wet to make sure everything lines up, because the engine's got to sit on the front cross member and the transmission's got to sit on another cross member. So you want to make sure that those two components are lined up true with each other. And now we're going to take a little bit of the Tamiya Extra Thin. We're going to touch the back of the bell housing, and we're going to glue this transmission down. And we are getting up to the end of the first video, because I think we're at almost a half an hour now. So I'm going to try to keep all the videos right around a half an hour, somewhere in that range. Okay, so that's what we have so far. We've glued together the engine halves. We've put some of the components on the engine. We put the bell housing on, and we put the transmission on. And we've got everything squared up and looking pretty good. Still have some mold lines to clean up here and there, but we're going to let all the glue dry, and then we'll come back and clean those up. And then we'll move on to the next steps. So that's all we've got for this video. Again, I want to thank everybody for watching. Seems like a lot of interest so far in it, so we're going to continue with it, and hopefully help out some newer guys to the hobby out there. So until next time, we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.